really grateful to be here this morning with all of you. So what we're going to be talking about today is lasting self-esteem. And what's so for me is that I've often in my life found that the solutions that worked for at least some other people didn't work for me. And I needed to come up, excuse me, with things that sometimes were pulling things together from other places, sometimes novel, sometimes unique, and sometimes just finding something that would work when other things wouldn't work. And like I'm sure some of you, I went to a lot of workshops over the years and trainings, some of them spiritual, some of them not. And what happened to me in that process with that was that I would come out of those things, those events, and I would feel full of myself in a good way. I would feel happy. I would feel a sense of self-esteem. And then within a fairly short time after that, I would find myself tanking. And I would be back to where I started, sometimes lower than I was before. And I got to the point about 2.5 years ago where I decided that I really wanted to study this thing called self-esteem, because I felt that that whatever I had been doing in the past hadn't lasted, hadn't sustained me, hadn't worked. And in my work, I'm a career coach, I do life coaching, I do business coaching, I work with individuals, I go into organizations, and I do coaching and I do training, I do speaking. And what I began seeing in the process of working with people, particularly in career coaching and so many other areas of life, was how self-esteem really is infused and permeates everything that we do from the moment that we get up. And it is so tied into who we are and how we perform in the world and how we perform in our relationship with ourselves, excuse me, that I found that sometimes the things were married in such a way that you couldn't even pull them out, couldn't even separate them. Just last week, someone who is very much part of my inner circle said to me, I've realized, I've been told, and I'm coming to see that I've been rejecting myself. And I don't know how I'm doing that. I'm too close to it. I can't see it. And by the end of the conversation, they were in shock and in awe at the same time of noticing how over the years a progression had happened. And it had shown up in all kinds of different ways, not wanting to be seen on Zoom meetings, having a very, very old photo of themselves, having just lots and lots of different ways in their life, ways that they talk about themselves, ways that they're showing up, where in fact they have been rejecting themselves. But it was so subtle, and it was so tied in with their overall ways of being that they simply couldn't see it. So in this conversation today with all of you, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the banana bread. Okay, so someone talked about banana bread during this conversation, and I want to take it to a different area, a different arena. I've been making banana bread forever. I've made it many, many, many times. I have a tried and true recipe that I use. I probably don't need a recipe by now. And it's old hat. And I know that when I make it, that people will like it, it will be tasty, it will look okay, it will serve the purpose. Well, last night I watched the Great British Baking Show, and suddenly it blew my standards out of the water, because not only were they looking at how something tasted on the most detailed level, They were looking at how it looked on the most detailed level. And if that person was making, if people were baking more than one of something, they were looking at consistency and texture and quality control. And they were raising the bar on a level that really had honestly not been in my vocabulary before. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at self-esteem. And maybe you've read books about self-esteem, and maybe you feel like you know about it and it's old hat, and maybe you've been to workshops and trainings and retreats, and maybe you feel like, well, yeah, I've kind of worked with that and it's been part of things over the years. Well, we're going to raise it to some new standards. We're going to take that banana bread and we're going to raise it to a whole new standard. Why? It's your brain. It's how you operate. It's part of your way of being. So one of the things that I did in this process of self-esteem was I decided that I would really start from scratch, and I would pull out all the stops and really move into beginner's mind with this process. And so I did something that I haven't done before around this, and I'm really looking for how to share with you this file that I have, which is not, it's not taking it for some reason. I'm not sure why.
The screen share is in green on my computer at the bottom.
Okay, so I press screen share.
If you put it on your desktop, then you'll see it on your desktop, and then you can hit screen share and then double click it and it'll come up.
Okay, it is on my desktop.
When you hit screen share, you'll see it on your desktop with the other stuff that's on the desktop. Just double click it and it should come up.
Yep, it has. Well, it's come up. It's not coming up though.
Then hit share. There, under shares in the
Okay.
corner on the screen share.
It's not doing it for some reason. It's simply not doing it. Okay, so what I wanted to share with you is a labyrinth. And the labyrinth is the labyrinth that I walked day in, day out for 7 months. And that labyrinth is located at Peace Awareness Labyrinth and Gardens, which is in the West Adams Historic District on West Adams Boulevard. It is a full-scale marble labyrinth. It is an outdoor labyrinth, and it is a clone of the Chartres Cathedral. The Chartres Cathedral's labyrinth in Chartres, France, was the original labyrinth, and it's based on the principles of sacred geometry. The particular labyrinth that I walked, and once we start easing restrictions, you'll be able to visit Peace Labyrinth yourself and have a go at this particular labyrinth. And one thing to know about this particular labyrinth is that it was blessed by a spiritual master, and it is a for me, it's holy ground for me. And so what I did day in, day out, sometimes multiple times a day, again for 7 months, was that I walked this labyrinth, and I walked it notebook in hand. And when I walked it, I kept asking all kinds of questions that came forward about self-esteem. I ask about self-esteem, I ask about self-confidence, I ask about myself, I ask philosophical questions, I ask concrete, practical, what I call practical spirituality questions. And by the end of 7 months, I had lots and lots of notes. And many of the answers that came forward on the labyrinth, I didn't understand. They didn't come in a place that did more than reach my mind. So I sat with it and I marinated with it. And I realized that what I had was something that was quite different than what the norm is around self-esteem and self-confidence. So if you go to, look around at workshops and trainings and those kinds of things, they talk up those workshops and books and materials all talk about building or raising or boosting self-esteem. And what I discovered was that that's bogus. There's no such thing as boosting or raising or building self-esteem. So think of it this way. Let's say you have a really junky foundation and you start trying to build a house on that junky foundation. What's going to happen? Well, eventually the house is going to cave. It's not going to work. So if you throw affirmations and you throw a bunch of good stuff on what is a junky foundation and you boost that part of things, it's not going to last. And for me, that explained why it had made no lasting impact for me to try to boost or to raise or to in any way try to build my self-esteem. So then what was the answer? Well, what I discovered was that it wasn't an additive process, but that it's a subtractive process. That in fact, what's necessary is to clear the process and to clear what's inside ourselves. And when we clear what's there, and I call what's there debris, that when we clear debris, that what's left is actually self-esteem and self-love. So what happens is that if you don't clear the debris, and debris is my term for negativity, if you don't clear the debris, then you're just building on junk and it simply doesn't last. Another thing that I discovered in this process is that we use in our culture the term self-esteem and self-confidence interchangeably. And in fact, they're opposite. They're not the same. So self-esteem is the relationship that you have with yourself. Again, the relationship you have with yourself. What do you say when you talk to yourself? What do you do? What is that inner relationship when no one else is around, in the privacy, in the sanctuary, in the relationship between you and yourself? That's your self-esteem. Your self-confidence is what you project out into the world. So self-confidence, you can build or raise or boost. How do you do that? Well, you do it Rocky style. You can take, let's say you've never done ice skating before. You can practice, you can take lessons, you can watch yourself on video. You can do you can learn from great teachers. You can do any number of things that outer actions will boost your self-confidence. And so self-confidence is about the skill set that you have and what you project to the world. They're quite different. When people speak about them interchangeably, that's what I would call a misunderstanding. So that was another one of my great learnings. And you might think, well, maybe that's just semantics and just in my head or someone else's head or intellectual debate. And what I discovered was that when you actually dig into it and you actually roll up your sleeves with it, it's a very different process to work with your self-esteem versus to build your self-confidence. The other thing that I learned in the process is that we tend to talk about self-esteem like it's fixed. We talk about it like, well, someone has self-esteem or they don't have self-esteem. And in fact, it's not fixed. It's something that is moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, week to week, month to month, and it vacillates. And it vacillates and it goes up and down. So the opportunity when you want to have lasting self-esteem is to use some tools that will keep on replenishing it and reminding you of your own self-worth and revealing that to yourself. So it's not a fixed commodity. And another concept, and I'm just doing a tip of the iceberg here, but another concept here is that there are 4 levels of self-esteem, 4 areas of debris that can be cleared: mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And if you try to address it in a flat one-liner kind of black and white way, it doesn't do it. It doesn't cut it. So you need to go in and zero in with the precision of the Great British Baking Show, what level is this showing up on? And how do I clear this particular debris? Now, out of all of this stuff, out of all of the things that I learned, I was initially just going to do it just for me and learn what I could learn. What came forward out of all of this process was this book. And it's called Precious You, Building the Path to Higher Self-Esteem. And there's a labyrinth on the cover because that was so much a part of my process. And the pencil is broken because I think I wore out many of them in the process of walking the labyrinth. And it's just a representation of how the old way of looking at things didn't work, doesn't work, doesn't cut it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the floor for questions, and we're going to be doing this I'll take some time to work through concepts with you, and then we'll open the floor because this is a very conscious and very enlightened and very wonderful group, and I'm wondering if any of you have any questions. So feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll open the floor for some questions.
Dr. Reiss, I think I've got an image of the labyrinth. If I put it up, could you tell us the process you went through when you walked it? Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's see if I can do that. Share. Did the labyrinth come up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's a wonderful representation. That particular labyrinth is the same kind of labyrinth that is in Chartres, France, or also at the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, and also at Peace Awareness Labyrinth and Gardens on West Adams Boulevard. Ours is marble. That one looks like it's brick or something like that. Ours has a white kind of a look to it. That one has a brown finish. And you'll notice that there are 4 sections to it. It is based on the principles of sacred geometry, and it looks like a brain. And it isn't in the way it functions, much like a brain with those kind of noodles. And the way it works is that you start at a particular point. You'll see the opening on the left in the middle. That's your opening. And you can't get lost on the labyrinth. It's not a maze. It's not like you go in and you can't come out. There is one way in and one way out. So how you get in is you follow the path on the labyrinth, and you start on that in that middle left-hand section where that opening is, and you follow it through. And there are moments where you're going to feel like you're very far from the center, and there are moments when you're going to feel like you're very close. And often neither one is accurate. When you're there, you're there. And the way you noodle around it and weave your way around is actually very good neurologically for the brain. And it represents, it has many, many different, if you go into mythology and you go into different books about it, there are many books written about sacred labyrinths. And you'll find that there is a lot, if you decide you want to pursue the sacredness or the mythology or the history of labyrinths, there are many, many books on the subject, and there's no shortage of information and material. For me, when I walked the labyrinth, I did it notebook in hand, which most people do not do. And when you're walking into it, that's the opening, that's the blossoming of it. And then as you get to the center and you start wending your way back the way that you came back to the opening, that's kind of coming into the conclusion. One of the things that I did when I walked this labyrinth was I called on my spiritual teachers, I called on my high self, I called on masters, I called on those parts of me that would know information and would know things that I didn't know. So that was part of it. Okay, so we can leave the labyrinth now. You can close that. Okay, thank you. So when you treat this as a process and you go into something beginner's mind, as I did, it can open to revelation. And so what I discovered was just these different arenas. So that was a great question. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Other questions or comments?
Is your book available to purchase?
Is the Labyrinth available to purchase?
No. Your book, you wrote a book?
It is. We can share the link with you either in the chat or afterwards, perhaps. Mary Grace can share that with you. It is available for purchase.
I'll send an email out about her book after the meeting.
Great, thank you.
I think Bill had his hand up.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
Bill?
Yeah, question here. Miriam, how would you describe for yourself the feeling that you have going into the center versus coming out? Is there a sense of need versus completion? And then do you find that you have the same reaction as other people? Do they have that sort of difference? Is there a difference in feeling from when going in and coming out?
Yes. The going in is an opening. I always go in, and I continue to walk the labyrinth to this day. I would always go in with questions. And sometimes my questions are mundane. And so yesterday I walked the labyrinth. I was trying to decide what particular insurance coverage to get, what medical insurance to get. And I had 4 different options for this particular aspect that I was looking into. And so I asked the question, what's for my highest good? I'm just giving you a very specific kind of mundane example.
Sure.
And I asked the question, what's for my highest good? And none of them popped out at me. And what I heard energetically was that it didn't make a difference, that they were all the same. These particular panels, there was no discernible difference as far as my highest good was concerned, which made my decision really easy. There are other times I'll walk in and I'll say, what do I need to know about this particular person? And in one case, I asked a question about one particular person that I had been having some issues with, and I really didn't understand what was going on, and I wanted to get along with them. And what came forward was that they had been a queen in one of their past lifetimes, a very well-known queen, actually. They had been a queen. And they had come into this lifetime with many of those same expectations. And they were treating people that were in their life either as though they were outcasts or members of their royal court. And they were treating people in a way that was very much in the lineage of that queen point of view. And they even spoke and they carried themselves in a very queen-like manner. And when I understood this about them, it really helped me a great deal, because I could see and I could pinpoint the part of them that was very gracious and very queenly in a very good kind of a sense. And I could also pinpoint the part of them that came across as very judgmental and sometimes condescending, which was the part that I had a hard time with. And so knowing that helped me detach and helped me see the humanity in this person and helped me bring forward my compassion. So those are 2 very different examples of the mundane, day in, day out decisions, dealing with people. I've had other times when I've walked the labyrinth and I've said, I have this particular quality or pattern that I want to work with, and what do I need to know? And I would listen then for whatever information came in. Now that was always on the way in. On the way out, I could feel like the chapter had closed. And it was the coda of a piece. It was the end. It was the tail end. It was, okay, you've done the job, you've done the work. We're just closing the door now. And so I always, when I stand at the opening, at the very end, I'm always grateful. I always thank my teachers. I always thank them, and I always thank the process for the information, for what came forward, whether or not I like it, however I feel about it. And sometimes the information has been surprising and quite the opposite of what I thought. I sometimes joke that labyrinth's been quite expensive for me, Because sometimes I walk in and I go, should I take this workshop, or should I go on this trip, or should I get this particular thing? And I'm in my mind said that I'm not going to do it because it's very expensive, or it's this, or it's that, or I have this thing, that this reason that I don't want to do it. And then I walk in and I hear the angels sing, and they're like, oh, this is really for you. And I'm going, crap. so that can come forward too. So this is just, this is, but for me, part of this process is not, is really going into surrender and going into neutrality.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the conclusions that came forward, and you're welcome, the conclusions that came forward in this book, I really trusted. And every day was like a different lesson. Every day was a different thing, because while I was going through self-esteem questions, life was happening around me. And there were other things that came up as well.
Great, thank you. I've
You're
seen
welcome.
hands by Ron and Jenny, and I don't know who else.
Dr.
Norma.
Davida. Okay.
Hi.
Dr. Reiss, it's Ron.
Hi, Ron.
How often do you visit this particular labyrinth?
I'm sorry, what was the
How
question?
often do you visit the labyrinth?
Whenever I have questions that I don't want to use my brain for.
And secondarily, the notes that you take, what do you do with the notes? Do you throw them out when you get home? Do you save them? Do you revisit the notes?
I have a notebook, a spiral bound notebook, and I don't save year after year. I typically have one notebook's worth. I don't save old notebooks.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hold a philosophy that if it's done, it's done. I don't revisit it because I don't want to reignite the feelings. If I've resolved material and I've come to conclusions about things and I've closed a chapter on something, I don't go back. I know there are lots of people who keep journals and diaries over the years and do a lot with that. And I made a choice not to do that.
Thanks a lot.
Good question. Thank you. Who else?
Hi. Hi, thank you, Dr. Miriam. I have actually had the pleasure of being at that labyrinth on Adams, and I'm hearing you say, although it's closed, you still now go to a labyrinth. Is there another one available, or do you have your own personal one?
There are lots of labyrinths around town. There is a labyrinth at, I think it's called St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank, which is very much size-wise and looks-wise the same kind of labyrinth that Peace Awareness Labyrinth and Gardens has. It doesn't have the same energetic, and it's in a hospital, so it's a different energetic. And I don't think it was. I don't think it's been treated energetically the way the Peace Labyrinth one has been treated, but it's still a labyrinth. And when you're calling on your highest spirit teachers and guides, you're bringing in that energy, and you're a portable paradise. You get to take that with you wherever you go.
So would you say that's the closest one to the one on Adams? Because I sort of live in that area of Adams. Is that the closest one in Burbank?
That's the closest one I found that resembles the size and look of the Peace Awareness one, of the Chartres Cathedral one.
Okay,
the one at Peace Awareness is a clone of the one in the Chartres Cathedral. Another thing about the one at Peace Labyrinth is that people are not allowed to cross the labyrinth, just walk across it. They need to, they're asked to be respectful and to walk it in the way that it was designed, and to not cut across the lines because it was energetically blessed. And that makes a difference. I walked the Grace Cathedral Labyrinth in San Francisco. And when I first got there, I honestly was horrified because it's at the front, it's near the front door of the cathedral, and the cathedral part is towards the back, and you have to cross over the labyrinth to get to the cathedral. And so the energetic of it is entirely different than the one that is on West Adams. For that reason, the energetics are very different. And while it physically is the one that is the first one that was built in the United States, that's a clone of the one in Chartres, France. Energetically, my experience was that it was nothing like the one that's on West Adams.
Yes, Jenny, and then Nita, please.
So, Miriam, thank you so much for the information. I have experience working on the labyrinths, and I wanted to ask you, how do you allow yourself to take the time to complete it? Because my experience was seeing people that will end up in the center very quickly, others have a different way of walking, that I had to close my eyes many times to be able to go my own pace. So how do you prevent yourself from distractions? And how do you have the commitment to complete it in the pace that you choose to have?
Well, the way that labyrinth is set up, if someone walks faster than you, there's labyrinth etiquette. So if someone walks faster than you step to the side and you let them go ahead of you. If, for me, if there's a whole group of people, I wait, or maybe I come back another time. So I find that I need a certain peace, and that, labyrinths are designed to be places of peace, of quiet. So different people will walk it at different paces. And I didn't always walk the whole labyrinth. Often I didn't. In my hurry, sometimes if I really needed an answer to something, I got that answer, I was complete, and I turned around and I left the labyrinth. So I didn't feel any sort of rule inside me that I had to walk the labyrinth in its entirety every single time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Nita and then Linda, please.
Hi, again, thank you, Dr. Reiss. So as I understand, you're tying self-esteem with the labyrinth by saying, giving yourself the time to do this exercise is what to do in order to realize your self-esteem. And in other words, I'm making, it feels like the conversation is more about the labyrinth.
Thank you.
And do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And also, I had the opportunity to walk the labyrinth at Sharper. And I was told that since I couldn't do it once, you can buy a copy of the labyrinth and sit with yourself and walk it with your finger and find a certain sense of peace in a small way, which I have done many times. So now I'll shut up.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to make this conversation about the labyrinth. The labyrinth happened to be my vehicle, and it was the primary way that I launched into my own inner exploration. I could have used meditation. I could have used lots of other venues or vehicles or tools. I happened to use the labyrinth because for me, it's something that I had been doing for years before that. So it made sense because I had gotten inner answers, higher answers from on other topics in other areas, that this was the place for me to go into surrender and into beginner's mind. So yes. So in answer to your question, yes, peace awareness labyrinth cells, smaller, cloth size, cloth material labyrinths that you can walk, larger scales that you can put on the wall, metal ones that you can use. So just a variety of things, so lots of different things. So I would call this the means to the end rather than the thing that we're focusing on. So I'd like now to move on because I want, and we'll come back to you and to your questions. I'd like to move on now to a different area. I'm going to invite you, if it's okay with you, to close your eyes. And I'm going to, at different points, and we're just going to do it for a couple of minutes. And at different points, I'm going to say the word now. And when I say the word now, I want you to notice, just notice what your mind is doing, what your mind is saying. Just notice it. And then go back to wherever you were, and we'll just keep going. Okay? So with your permission, we're going to close our eyes now to create that private space inside. And just let your mind go. Now. 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 And when you're ready, open your eyes and come back to the room.
Mm.
And we'll open the floor once again.
Okay, Linda and then Lisa, please.
Okay. What did you notice?
I think maybe she had a question rather than a comment on the process you just did.
Okay, that's fine.
Jenny?
Do you want me to share, Bill? Because I had my hand up before.
Or Lisa, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what I noticed when you said now is that for some reason I can feel my blood rushing through my head. And also I have a clock in my living room. So I was really very aware of small sounds that I probably don't notice when I'm just sitting around normally. In terms of the question that I had prior, I'm a visual artist and I had put it on hold for many years. So I'm re-entering into this thing that I love to do. And I have this discussion in my head about, and I'm not sure if it's self-esteem or self-confidence, but I've been working on it for 5 years. And I'm at the point where I feel comfortable with the media that I work. But there's this dialogue in my head about, well, you're not really good enough, Lisa. You need to wait before you start entering it into shows. But then everyone that sees my work says, oh my gosh, Lisa, your work is magnificent. Why aren't you entering it in shows? So I constantly have this argument in my head about, I'm hearing people telling me that I'm good, but I cannot make the connection in terms of my self-esteem and how I feel about my work. And so I don't know if that's an esteem issue or a confidence issue. And so maybe you could clarify.
So when we did the now exercise, is this where your mind went? Okay, okay.
No, it actually, I got focused on the noise, like dogs barking outside the window,
Okay.
the clock, the blood rushing through my head. I mean, I was very sensitive to the noise around in my environment. Okay. And my personal body too, you know, my breathing and the blood rushing through my head and stuff like that.
So so you became aware of yourself physically. Did your mind quiet down?
Yeah.
Did the thought stop?
Yes.
Okay. So what this process does is it focused a spotlight on your brain. And your brain said what?
You mean before I did the now thing? Or after?
During the process.
I totally forgot about my conflict, my inner conflict that I was having that I wanted to share with you. Totally.
Okay. So by shining, and I might put a little different language on it, just from my listening, I might say, well, sometimes when we put a spotlight on the brain says, well, I'm embarrassed. I'm not going to show you the usual stuff. I'm going to go quiet. So in fact, what you were doing was you were controlling your brain. You were managing your brain. It's like someone else was looking at your brain in that moment.
Uh-huh.
So when we shine a spotlight on the brain, this is a demonstration to you that you have the ability to control your thoughts. So the concept here with this is that the brain, in fact, is what I would call a ball machine. And this is one of the other things that I touch on in the book, that and one of my primary learnings, that the brain is a ball machine. And if you've ever played tennis or ping pong or baseball or softball, ball machines are these machines that they often plug in somewhere and they shoot balls out. Their job is to shoot balls out. And some of those balls are great balls, balls that you want to hit. And some of those balls are balls that you want to ignore because they're low or they're out in left field or they're wild or they're too low, they're too high, they're not good balls. So part of what you have an opportunity to do is to do what we did in this last minute and a half, which is to observe your brain, to become a neutral observer and to go, okay, that's a thought. That's all it is. It's a thought. My art isn't valuable. It's a thought. I'm going to honor that thought, or I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to let it pass. That's a ball. I'm going to let it pass. And so the mental level is that you're going to get really, really good at discerning the balls. So this is part of the debris clearing process of self-esteem, where you no longer follow your thoughts, but rather you're behind the wheel and you're managing your thoughts. You're putting a spotlight on them and you're saying, these are simply balls. Which ones do I want to pay attention to? And which ones do I just want to ignore and let go by? Okay.
Miriam, thank you very much. We have 1 minute left. There was one request that came in, if you could give us a detailed example of the clearing debris from each of the 4 levels. I know there's not enough time for that. And then also Linda had a question. She was waiting patiently. So no, you're good. Well, do you want to?
I think Bill,
yeah.
we go to 8:50 now.
Do we now?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, that's an extra 5 minutes. So do you want to wrap up by giving some examples of each of the 4 levels, how we clear debris?
So I'm not going to have time to do that. I don't have time to do that in these conversations. There's too much to it. But I wanted to give you an example of the mental level and one of the tools that I use to clear debris on the mental level, which is to remind yourself that your brain is a ball machine, and that when you see those balls coming at you, that you take charge of the balls and that you step back as a neutral observer and you decide which of those balls you're going to pay attention to. Now, I have several dozen tools in the book for each of the levels because I like to offer a smorgasbord. And each of those tools is designed to move you forward. One thing I do want to mention, which is a core concept of the book, which is that once you've cleared debris, what's left is your self-esteem. And it has the opportunity to reveal itself to you. Just as once you clear your unhappiness, suddenly you'll feel happy. It's the same basic premise. That in fact, your self-esteem was factory installed by the manufacturer, AKA spirit. You came in with it. But what happened was that over the years, in the course of your childhood and your growing up years, so much debris came forward that it got submerged underneath that. I want to give you one caveat about that. One of the things that I learned in this process, which is that if you've had a horrible childhood, if you've had a tremendously abusive childhood, then sometimes a very abusive childhood will clear that basic ground line factory installed self-esteem. And what you need to do initially is to begin mocking it up. And I have 2 meditations in the book that are part of the keys in the book to begin mocking it up and reinstalling it. And that has to do with circulating it back through yourself and through spirit. So when there's been a history, for example, with many people of day in, day out abusive childhoods, then you need to kind of do a reset, and you need to do a factory reinstall. And for me, in my particular situation, the reason I couldn't sustain the self-esteem was that I needed to do a factory reinstall. Closing question, closing comment?
Yeah, I have a question, Sam, Mary Grace's husband. You talked about self-esteem as having to do with the relationship one has with him or herself. Does this, I guess the question is, are you talking about uncovering or letting your authentic self be revealed to you? Is that what we're talking about here? Just clarification.
I'm specifically talking about not your authentic self, but your self-esteem. The focus here is on self-esteem and letting and clearing the debris so that the self-esteem can be present for you. It's not about building or raising or boosting it. It's about clearing what's standing in the way.
Boosting it. I was talking about, I guess you're saying self-esteem are the positive thoughts you have about yourself, as opposed to when you walk the labyrinth, you obviously are seeking some guidance from your deeper self, and that's why I asked the question about seeking one's authentic self.
Yeah, I called the book Precious You because self-esteem is not about positive thoughts. Self-esteem is a knowingness in your bones of your own innate preciousness and loving who you are on the cellular level as precious, as a child of God, as a divine being, and treating yourself moment by moment, day in, day out, from that place of God-given preciousness.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the mind.
No, I didn't think it had anything to do. I like what you said about self-esteem is not something about building, because I've always been repulsed by that idea, even though I'm a therapist. So I like that you're talking about the innate nature of who we are is what we need to value. Thank you.
It's knowing it at the core. And when you know it at the core, then you're solid no matter what's happening around you.
Great. Thank you so much. That's a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much for your presentation.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for showing up.